You mentioned lupus. Let's move on to the second in the series, which is the Ladydrawers like lupus. So I think many people have heard the word lupus. They've heard of the disease, but maybe don't even actually know what exactly it is. What exactly is lupus?
So lupus is a particular autoimmune disease that it's different from other autoimmune diseases because most autoimmune diseases they sort of stay in their lane, right? They choose a focus point of their relentless attack and they go at it. But lupus is a slightly more mysterious autoimmune disorder in that it kind of can attack any of the systems in your body. And it's actually sort of like, did you ever see House, the TV show House?
Oh, yeah. And the answer was it's lupus.
Yeah, every time it was lupus. And then it turns out not to be lupus because that would give you the answer and it would be too easy. But it was always lupus because lupus is just this incredibly bizarre mystery disease that sort of attacks anything. And nobody knows why, and we're never going to research it and figure out why. So, so it has a couple of symptoms, like you get a little rash on your face here, on your cheeks, and you get really tired. But then it can be like, then your liver fails, or then you start, I don't know, sneezing all the time, or your kidneys don't work quite as well, or something like that. Or lungs, I think, are another one. I think it affects your eyesight as well. So it's really, really hard to diagnose. But one thing about it that's particularly troublesome is that it does affect women of color in significantly higher rates than it affects white women. And of course, it affects women significantly more than it affects men. And so African American women with the disease and Latino women tend to have much more deadly effects and side effects. Kidney failure is really, really, really common than white women do. And so these are diseases that are not only gendered, but also raced in a really distressing way.
In the strip, you actually talk, specifically lupus actually has something that has there's some evidence that there is a connection to the drug Humira. Talk about that, about the connection, and I guess Humira's huge payouts to doctors, which you also document in the strip.
Yeah, and this was a pretty tricky one. And actually, this strip did come out of, I was given Humira a couple months ago, and was pretty much told like this is the standard, this is what everyone takes for this certain sets of autoimmune disorders, and there's a couple different autoimmune disorders that it treats, and it's true that there are people who get a lot out of it, but I wasn't really told. It's a scary drug. It's a black box drug, which means that that once you are prescribed it, every medical professional you speak to has to tell you that you might die if you take it.
Wow.
And so you're sort of in constant terror the entire time. But what they don't necessarily mention, or what they tend to overlook because the moment of impending death is so scary, is that it also can cause lupus-like symptoms. Or in some cases, people complain that they actually never get over their lupus-like symptoms. And when you have lupus-like symptoms for a number of years, it seems to me that we can maybe start calling that lupus. So,
Right.
So Humira can cause something that looks like or something that becomes lupus. And it is the number one prescription drug. How they decide that changes all the time, so has occasionally been the number one prescription drug for rheumatoid arthritis and psoriatic arthritis, and I think ulcerative colitis possibly also, for a number of years. And then recently, of course, ProPublica released this big study about payouts to doctors, and the manufacturer of Humira was revealed to be the 12th highest paying out drug company in the U.S. And they had actually given out $18.5 million to doctors, mentioning in the payout order the prescription of the drug Humira. The problem, of course, being that they are potentially over-prescribing, I would say, in my case, since I was prescribed a drug that gave me a totally new autoimmune disorder, definitely over-prescribing, a drug that, can cause a lot of damage on one hand, and on the other hand, can cause a lot of particularly race damage, since lupus tends to afflict women of color significantly more than white women. And that's a really, that's a really complicated but really big problem, I think, that we don't necessarily look at when we think about, like, oh, big pharma, it's so bad and they don't test things right. Like, this is a pretty complicated system.
How do we even get to the core of the main? I mean, because like the problem is it is really unbelievably complex, right? So you have elements of sexism and the patriarchy, and then you have capitalism in big pharma that's screwing over people. And again, why just the whole concept of like pharma reps is unbelievably insulting to me. It just like people like go like taking doctors out for expensive meals, putting them on trips out to the Caribbean or something like that. Just the connection of healthcare to capitalism is just something that's so horrible and wrong. How do we even get to the core major problem that contributes to all of this, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, and the thing...
What I'm saying is, Anne, solve this problem for me now.
Okay, well, just give me a second.
No, now.
I grew up, my dad was a doctor. My dad was a neuroradiologist. And so I grew up with, like, sort of seeing both the stress of being a doctor, and, he was not a terribly nice person, so, like, maybe even being on the receiving end of the stress of being a doctor. And, but also sort of seeing why those golf trips and some of that, those fancy dinners actually do make a certain amount of sense. Like, and I'm not, like, the graft and corruption is bad. For sure.
Why do you like
fancy
graft,
dinner because
Anne?
you work your ass. You what?
Why do you like graft?
I know, pro-corruption. But what we're talking about with this AbbVie stuff, and AbbVie is the maker of Humira, is actual money payouts, like checks written to doctors to prescribe a drug. And that, to me, crosses a very particular line of actual corruption. How to resolve it? I mean, for one, we need more investigative reporting, which is my answer to everything. That's how we resolve everything, by the way, Matthew. Always fund investigative reporting. But also, like, oversight on how the finances of these medical companies work and their relationship to big pharma. I mean, a lot of that would cut out some of these problems right away. Like the issue we just saw with the guy who bought the drug manufacturing company and upped the price like some
3,000% or something like
3,000%?
Yeah.
Like, what's that about? That shouldn't even be happening. We shouldn't even have to talk about that. So, yeah, it's a nightmare. And it's a nightmare when you, as I experienced this summer, it's a nightmare when you're living it. And you can't, like at a dinner party, you can't be like, oh yeah, I got this autoimmune disease, my fifth one, because my doctor prescribed the drug to treat it. Like, that doesn't make sense to people.